Yeah, it's a little bit quick here, but anyway, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through some slides here, and what I'm speaking about is of course micro-credentials, and you gave me the headline, is it, and I ask it as a question, a new opportunity for lifelong learning. The thing which I will share with you here are the preliminary results of a study which Cedefop started this year. So we have been going on now for almost a year. And our project is particularly focused on the potential role of micro-credentials for vocational education training and for kind of labor market-oriented education and training. So in a way, we have a particular perspective which in a way reflects the mandate of our agency and the focus on more vocational, professional labor market training. But I think the findings, as you will see, will be of relevance also to sort of say the broader discussion of micro-credentials. So you can shift to the next slide, and you can go to the next. You just click through the different points, the 3 points, yes. So just a moment, it was a little bit, so, okay. So in a way, why do Cedefop do a study on micro-credentials? First of all, we have observed that recent research on this phenomena is very much linked to higher academic education. It doesn't really address the issues of vocational education and training and broader kind of labor market relation, education and training. And in a way, we think this is quite important, because if micro-credentials are going to serve wider lifelong learning purposes, we need really to see how these new kind of credentials, certificates, qualifications are actually serving the entire education training. So this is our kind of the background for why we started this study. You can go to the next slide. So what are the challenges we are seeing now in terms of micro-credential? I'm sure that sort of say you have heard a term. It's almost like it's referred to as a hype. It's some of the most popular term we are seeing now in the discussions on qualifications. And there's been a number of efforts from the OECD, from the European Union, the Bologna follow-up group, a number of others, at least in the European setting, but also beyond Europe, to try to define which are the key characteristics of this phenomena of micro-credential. What we see as a kind of a common issue here is that it's broadly, micro-credentials are broadly referring to learning over a limited time and in relation to very specialized or specific areas. So it's the small units of learning, short time, very specialized. In some cases, these smaller credentials might form part of a formal or a full qualifications. You can click on the next points. In some cases, they also are seen as in a way, the term used very often is stackable, that they can be stacked over time to be combined across different institutions, sector, even countries to build the individual learning paths or support individual learning progress. It's also very often stated that given their limited size and focus, they are more flexible than full or normal qualifications. So in that sense, they are better able to address the needs of the labor market, the needs of the individual learners. What is also very commonly commented on is that these micro-credentials are frequently, so to say, delivered in a digital form. So the question we see, the definitions are not clear, the definitions are not agreed. I think these points which I have referred to here are quite commonly seen. But the question is when we are speaking about micro-credentials, are we actually observing a genuinely new form of recognition of learning, or are we actually adding a new name to an old phenomena? So So in a way, when we start our study, it is really about trying to understand what is the characteristics, what's the limits, but also what's the potential of this phenomenon. So you can go to the next slide. I brought up this citation from, we have had a survey, which I will come back to a little bit later, but we got quite a lot of interesting responses. And one of the interesting responses was from the German Employers Federation. What they emphasize is that they see a potential in micro-credential, but a very important issue here is, can we trust them? What kind of flexibility? What kind of sort of say future orientation will this micro-credential have? And there's a lot of tensions here which will decide whether these are going to be successful or not. I won't read the citation, but the PowerPoint will be made available afterwards, and you can have a look at those comments. But it clearly sort of say addresses the tensions involved in this. There's a potential, but there are also dangers. There's possibilities for flexibility. There are also issues if you overly regulate this area, which actually could undermine this. So just as a kind of a glimpse into responses of the different stakeholders involved. So you can move to the next slide, please. So what in more detail are our objectives? And I think going into that, and you can move to the next slide and just click through the 3 boxes, I'm sorry. Yeah, and the first work assignment is actually where we are trying to see what is actually going on in this area, because nobody really has a clear understanding what is the area of micro-credentials looking like, and in particular, what is the area of micro-credentials looking at in the area of vocational education and training. The second thing we are looking at is the role of these potentially new credentials in what we say is evolving qualifications credential systems. And that includes also qualification systems where the frameworks are now taking a more active role. And the third one is actually, what does this mean for individual learners? So you can go to the next, and I will give you a little bit glimpse into these 3. So if you then click. So work assignment 1 is basically the question, to what extent are micro-credentials actually used for the purposes I mentioned? And do they form, so to say, an integrated part of formal qualifications credential systems? And to what extent are they actually meeting the needs of companies, of employees, and so on and so forth? So there's sorry, there's some disturbances here in the picture.
And now, is it okay?
Yeah, just a moment. Yeah, now it's good. So you can move to the next. The second one, I think, is interesting for the discussion of the African continental qualification framework, because what does this new phenomenon of micro-credentials actually mean for evolving qualification systems? How are micro-credentials linked to and integrated into the overall qualifications and credential systems? Are they changing the balance? Are they introducing a new element, new flexibility? Are they threatening the trust which is required for these systems? So which are the objectives and roles, if any, of micro-credentials in national qualifications and credential systems? And I think this is an important issue to ask, or a question to ask, when we're discussing qualification frameworks, which in a way have this aim to make more structure, more transparent, the broader qualifications and credential systems. So what we ask is about the balance in a way here. Are we moving towards a system where the public qualifications, full qualifications, are in a way becoming less important, and where kind of micro-credentials, perhaps very diverse from many different providers, is actually influencing this and reshaping the balance of qualifications and credential systems? So this is the work assignment 2. So you can go to 3. So, and this is, of course, the essential question, and I don't pretend to say that we have the answers to this work assignment, because it's really about the end users. And the question here is the trust to micro-credentials. Which conditions must be met by micro-credentials to ensure, well, portability, we say, transferability? How can you combine them? How can you stack them? Can you transfer them? Can you use them in a lifelong learning career? So this is essential for individual learners to make use of micro-credential. What kind of support do they require? What kind of conditions do we have to fulfill to create this kind of condition of trust? And in a European setting, we are of course very interested in seeing how could micro-credentials play a more targeted role in supporting what we call age-neutral systems for vocational education training, linking better together the initial training and the continuing training, linking together the training focused on young people and the learning, lifelong learning of older people. So the question is, can micro-credentials actually play a role here? So these were the three main work assignments we are working according to. So you can move on. I will just briefly take you through some, and this is not the key point, but we'll just say that we are using a combination of methodologies, case studies, desk research, interviews, surveys, because it's sort of a challenging area. So we needed to use this combination of methodologies. You can go to the next slide. Yeah, so some preliminary findings, and I underline that these are preliminary findings. We have carried out surveys to 4 different stakeholders, to national authorities responsible for qualification systems and framework, to vocational education training providers, to employer organizations, and to employee organization. And we think it is necessary, and we see it's necessary to actually go to all of these, because micro-credentials are different in character from traditional formal qualifications or as issued by national authorities. We see that the diversity of providers is much bigger. It's much more difficult to see actually what is going on, who is actually behind them, and who are actually using them. So that's also a reminder that it's a more diverse group of stakeholders involved in this area than you would normally find in traditional qualifications, certificates, credentials. You can move to the next slide. An interesting thing here is that when we ask this, are they aware of micro-credentials? That's the very first question. What we see, and that's perhaps the most important finding for the moment, is that there's a lot of many of the stakeholders are not aware of micro-credentials. They don't know what it is. They are not aware of the role played. So in a way, that is in particular the case for employer organizations, but also employee organizations. And we also see that a little bit more awareness among national authorities and vet providers, but this kind of, we don't know, we are not aware, we are not really sure what this phenomena is important, because it also is a warning for us to use the term micro-credential kind of uncritical, because this is clearly an arrangement or an initiative or a system which is evolving, and we don't really know in which direction it is. You can go to the next slide. Next, yes. And the benefits, I won't go into this, you can have a look at the slides afterwards, but just to list some of the key benefits in. First of all, flexibility is something which everybody refers to. These smaller chunks of credentials, in a way, the flexibility offered is important. Many see it as linked to lifelong learning, but also the responsiveness, that you can act quickly through micro-credentials to address skills needs and to actually certify or value this in a quick way. It differs a little bit between the different, in a way, what is emphasized, but flexibility is certainly very important, responsiveness is important, and the general potential role in relation to lifelong learning, linking initial continuing training as an instrument for lifelong learning is overall seen as important. You can move to the next slide. And then we come to what is, I think, critical in this kind of transition period, where we see micro-credentials potentially coming up as an important aspect of qualifications credential system. It's the perception of credibility and trust. And here we again see a lot of kind of uncertainty regarding the trust. If we see a kind of increasing use of micro-credentials offered by individual education providers, can these be trusted by individuals? What kind of basis is this trust built on, in a way? And can we be sure that these micro-credentials actually can be combined, can become a part of a full qualification, that they can be stacked or accumulated over a lifelong learning period? And I think it is very important for policymakers and for national systems, and also I think increasingly international, as I say, agencies and also authorities, to look at this. What is the basis of trust? And the European Commission is currently working on a recommendation for micro-credentials, which is in particular looking at this issue. How can you, so to say, in a transparent way, show the kind of quality behind it and ensure the trust in micro-credentials? I think this is the purpose of the work that being done by the Commission. This is not finalized, but there will be a proposal presented by the end of this year. So you can go to the next slide. You can just go on. And as we see, as the kind of flip side of trust, there is distrust, and it's the same arguments in a way that micro-credentials need this trust. It's not only a question of the digital format or the technical format or the kind of the technical aspects of micro-credentials. It is really very much about the currency here. Can you exchange a micro-credential into a learning career, into a full qualification? So I would in a way emphasize micro-credentials, if they are going to succeed, if they are going to play a role in lifelong learning, they need to be kind of trusted currencies, which you can exchange into something else in another context. If they cannot, well, then it's a big question, what will be their overall role? So trust, distrust, currency, exchange into so to say progression in other settings, I think that is very important. You can move to the next slide. So, yeah. We are doing case studies in 8 European countries, and well, it's not so important in this context. The point is that we have chosen very different countries, big countries, smaller countries within Europe. So those will provide us very important insights into this, and that will allow us to go deeper into this. But just some, in the next slide, I will show you some of the conclusions. And what we see from these countries at this point, and we are not finalized with the study, is that term micro-credential is not commonly used in national context. And the provision of short learning experience, both certified and uncertified, is actually a long-standing practice in most of these countries. And the responsiveness, micro-credentials can be seen as a way to respond to skills needs. And of course, there's also this link to flexibility. But the picture from the case studies is mixed in a way. It is not really a common term. There is a bit of confusion. Is this actually a new name on old practices? But it is seen as a possible way of increasing flexibility and increasing responsiveness. So in that sense, it's similar to the surveys, the case studies we are doing. We get, in a way, indications in the same direction. And that brings me soon to the end of it. So if you move to the next slide. Yeah, just before I go to the final slide, I just want to emphasize there are limitations in what I'm saying now. Of course, we are in the middle of a study, but so I'm just giving you the kind of indications. But what is the strength of our study, I think, and that we see already now, is that it goes beyond the kind of pure academic use of micro-credentials, because there's been a lot of focus. If you look at what the OECD has been doing, they have been looking at higher education and academic institutions. And we think, as I said at the beginning, it's important to go beyond that. So now we can move to the final slide. And that's some questions then. And the big question is, we now see micro-credentials being referred to in a lot of different contexts, in different countries. So the question we have to ask ourselves, is this something new? Or is this something so to say, better define, to say, and standardize already existing offers? What is the real link here to part-year qualifications, to modules, to modularization, to unit-based qualification systems? How does micro-credentials fit into the emerging and evolving qualification systems linked to the qualification frameworks? And what is the role in relation to the labor market? So if you kind of hope that I would give you the final answers to all these questions, I'm not able to do that. I think we are looking at an area clearly in evolution. It's an area with a lot of big questions asked by those involved. I think there is an agreement that potentially micro-credentials as a more flexible, responsive form of credential can actually play a role in terms of providing a more flexible approach. It can support individuals, but if it's going to do this, it has to be based on trust and transparency. If not, it will be difficult to see how its currency function, how to exchange it into progress, into other kind of fuller qualifications will happen. And I hope that these observations and reflections can help you also to discuss that the role of micro-credentials in your national context and also regional context. But we are in the middle of an interesting evolution here, where qualification systems in general probably are changing in way from the traditional regulated, perhaps in some cases public system, to a system where you have other stakeholders, other providers, more diverse kind of institutions certifying, issuing credentials in a way. And the question is, of course, how this balance would look and how we want to govern, steer, or influence this balance. And I think that is enough for me. I'm sorry for the confusion at the beginning of the uploading, but I think that should be enough from my side. So thank you.